Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Timeless Affairs. It was one of those serene summer evenings when a gentle breeze wafted through the open window, enveloping the surroundings in stillness and tranquility. I had dedicated the entire day to my grandmother's house, assisting her with the garden, attending to various repairs, and relishing her companionship, as I always did during my visits. Her home felt like a second sanctuary to me, brimming with childhood memories, moments of her nurturing care, and a unique sense of comfort that only she could offer. By the time dusk arrived, I found myself utterly fatigued, ready to collapse into the bed in the guest room, which she always kept made up for me. I remember drifting off to sleep quickly, the soft sounds of the night lulling me into a deep, dreamless slumber. But at some point during the night, something stirred me awake. I wasn't sure what it was at first. Maybe it was the feeling of the sheets shifting or the faintest sound of footsteps. On the hardwood floor outside my room, I blinked my eyes open, groggy and disoriented, the dim glow of the moon filtering through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. For a moment I thought I was imagining things, the haze of sleep still clouding my mind. But then I heard it again, the soft creak of the door slowly opening. My heart quickened, though I wasn't afraid. After all, it was just Grandma, probably checking in on me like she used to when I was a kid. I could just picture her in her nightgown, moving silently through the house, making sure I was tucked in, comfortable and safe. It was a habit she'd never quite broken. Even now that I was much older, I decided to keep my eyes closed, pretending to still be asleep, curious about what she would do next. Maybe it was silly, but there was something oddly comforting about the thought of her still watching over me like that. I could hear the soft rustle of her clothes as she stepped into the room, her movements slow and deliberate. The air shifted slightly as she came closer to the bed, and I could sense her presence beside me, standing there quietly. My breathing slow, trying to remain, even though my heart was racing a bit now, a strange anticipation building within me. I didn't know why, but the idea of her being so close watching me while I slept stirred something inside me that I couldn't quite explain. Then I felt it, the gentle touch of her fingers on the blanket, pulling it up slightly as if she was making sure I was properly covered. Her touch was soft, almost reverent, and I could feel the warmth of her hand lingering as she smoothed out the fabric. My body tensed for a moment, but then relaxed, reassured by the familiarity of it. Still, there was something different this time, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Her hand lingered a little too long, and I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, even though my eyes were still closed. I was wide awake now, but I kept my breathing steady, pretending to remain in my dreamlike state. Her hand moved again, this time lightly brushing against my arm, as though she was making sure I wasn't too cold. But the way her fingers trailed over my skin sent a shiver through me, one that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was a slow, deliberate touch, something far more intimate than I had ever experienced from her before. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but my body betrayed me, reacting to her touch in ways I didn't fully understand. As her fingers continued their slow exploration, I could hear her breathing steady and quiet, as if she was lost in thought or perhaps something more. The seconds stretched on each one, feeling heavier than the last, and I couldn't shake the strange mixture of emotions swirling inside me, confusion, curiosity, and something else that I couldn't quite name. I didn't move, didn't speak, unsure of what to do or how to react. A part of me wanted to turn over to see her face and ask her what she was doing, but another part of me was too afraid to break the silence too, captivated by the unfolding moment to bring it to an end. She moved closer, then the bed dipping slightly as she sat down beside me. I could feel the heat of her body through the blanket, the soft weight of her presence grounding me. In this surreal moment, her hand, now free of the blanket, found my arm again, and this time her fingers moved with more intention, slowly tracing their way up to my shoulder. My breath hitched in my chest, and I struggled to maintain the pretense of sleep, my body responding to her touch in ways that I didn't fully understand but couldn't deny. Her hand moved with a slow, practiced grace, and I realized that this was no accidental gesture. There was a purpose behind it, a deliberate act that I hadn't anticipated. I felt the warmth of her palm press lightly against my chest now, just above my heart, and for a moment I wondered if she could feel the erratic rhythm it had taken on my skin tinged under her touch. And I could sense the weight of something unspoken hanging between us, filling the room with an almost palpable tension. She leaned in closer, then her breath warm against my ear, and I could hear the soft whisper of her movements. As she settled beside me, her hand, which had been resting on my chest, began to move lower, tracing slow circles across my skin. My mind was spinning, now a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that I couldn't control. What was she doing, and why wasn't I stopping her? The questions raced through my head, but my body remained still, caught in the strange spell she had woven around us. Her touch grew bolder, and I could feel her hand sliding down the length of my body, lingering at the edge of the blanket before slipping beneath it. The sensation of her fingers on my skin was both startling and thrilling, and I bit my lip to keep from gasping out loud. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and with each passing second, the boundary between what was real and what I had once thought impossible seemed to blur. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but it felt as though the world outside had disappeared, leaving only the two of us in this quiet, charged space. Her hand continued its slow exploration, and I could feel her fingers tracing patterns on my skin, each touch igniting a spark that sent ripples through my entire body. She shifted again, her weight pressing more firmly into the mattress as she leaned over me, her breath now warm against my neck. I could feel the faintest brush of her lips against my skin, so soft that I might have imagined it if not for the warmth that lingered afterward. The sensation sent a shiver down my spine, and for the first time, I let out a small involuntary sound, a quiet gasp that broke the silence between us. Her hand paused for a moment as if she was waiting for a reaction, but when I didn't pull away, she continued her touch, growing more insistent by now. The air in the room was thick with tension, and I could feel the electricity crackling between us, charging every movement, every breath. I could sense that she was testing the boundaries, pushing the limits of what was possible, and I was caught in the current of it. Unable or perhaps unwilling to resist, her touch grew more intimate, and I felt my body responding in ways that I hadn't expected. My pulse quickening, my breath shallow and uneven. Her hand moved lower still, and I could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on me, her fingers tracing a path that left me breathless. My thoughts were a jumble, now a chaotic mix of confusion, desire, and something else that I couldn't quite name. I wanted to say something to ask her what she was doing, why she was doing this, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I lay there still pretending to be asleep, my body betraying me with every subtle shift, every barely concealed reaction. She was so close now that I could feel the heat, and I could sense the quiet determination in her movements, the way her hand continued its slow, deliberate journey across my skin. Each touch felt like a question, and my silence seemed to be answering them one by one. Even though I wasn't sure what the answers meant, there was something hypnotic about the way she moved, and I found myself sinking deeper into the moment, letting the rhythm of her touch guide me. Time seemed to slow down, and I wasn't sure how long we stayed like that. The two of us wrapped in the stillness of the night, our breaths the only sound in the room. Her hand, once tentative, had grown bolder, and I could feel the weight of her intent, pressing down on me like a physical force. My mind raced, caught between the need to understand what was happening and the overwhelming desire to let it continue. Then she started to remove my nightdress. She continued moving her fingers on my naked skin, touching everything she could touch. All of my body was exposed to her, and she kissed lightly on my skin, kisses trailing down to my legs and other parts of the body. I couldn't say anything or move, so I started enjoying it. After a few minutes of her kissing me and exploring my body, she withdrew. Her hand slipped away from my body, and the absence of her touch left me feeling both relieved and strangely bereft. I could hear the soft rustle of her clothes as she stood up, the quiet creak of the floorboards as she moved away from the bed. I lay there, my heart still racing, unsure of what had just happened or what it meant. What it meant was something I couldn't grasp fully. Not yet. My mind was a blur of emotions torn between the familiarity of who she was and the strange new feelings she had just stirred within me. As I lay there, still pretending to be asleep, I couldn't help but replay every single second of her touch, the way her fingers had traced my skin like she knew exactly what she was doing. It left me aching with questions I couldn't ask and a hunger I didn't even know. I had the room now quiet again, felt different, like the air itself had shifted, charged with a tension that wouldn't go away. My body still burning with the memory of her warmth, and I knew there was no going back to the way things were before. I heard her footsteps grow faint as she moved back into the hallway, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still with me somehow, that her touch lingered in the surrounding air. The bed felt empty, cold without her presence beside me, and I found myself wanting her to return to finish. Whatever it was she had started, my pulse quickened at the thought, and I hated how much I craved the closeness again. But what could I do? I was stuck in the confusion of it all, unsure if I should confront her or let it remain an unspoken secret between us, something I would carry with me in the quiet of the night. And yet, despite the confusion,